It started with a scream, sharp, terrified, echoing down the marble hallway of a millionaire's mansion. Moments later, a maid burst through the door, and what she saw froze her blood. The nanny, trusted, elegant, and loved by everyone, was hurting the millionaire's only son. That single moment tore through the illusion of perfection, unleashing a storm of fury, guilt, and redemption that would change every life inside that house forever. The scream was sharp enough to pierce the stillness of the house. Evelyn Cooper froze where she stood, the damp rag slipping from her hand and falling onto the polished wooden floor. The echo of the cry carried down the long hallway of the Grant residence, a house too big, too quiet for comfort. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined it, until she heard it again. It was unmistakably the cry of a child, high-pitched, frightened, desperate. Her heart began to race. The sound came from Michael's room, the little boy she looked after every day, the one who used to giggle at her silly songs, but had lately turned quiet, withdrawn. Then came another voice, harsher, older, soaked in anger. "Stop crying like a baby, Michael. You're 5 years old, not a toddler." Evelyn's pulse spiked. That voice belonged to Melissa Grant, the live-in nanny. Without thinking, she dropped the bucket, her shoes thudding softly against the hardwood as she ran down the hallway. Every step made the sound of Michael's crying grow louder, sharper, until it almost vibrated in her chest. She pushed the bedroom door open without knocking. What she saw froze her blood. Melissa stood over the boy like a shadow, one hand clutching his thin arm so tightly that her knuckles were white. Michael struggled to pull away, his face wet with tears, his tiny legs kicking helplessly. "Melissa!" Evelyn's voice shook. The woman turned sharply, her eyes cold and unbothered. "You don't belong here, Evelyn. Go back to your work. You're hurting him. Kids need discipline." Melissa pinched his arm again, harder this time, leaving an angry red mark. Michael cried out, twisting in pain. That was it. Something inside Evelyn snapped. She had seen bruises before, on her own mother years ago, when her father used to drink and lash out. But seeing it again, on a helpless child, broke something open inside her. She stepped forward without hesitation, her voice rising with a kind of trembling authority she didn't even know she had. "Let him go right now." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "You're going to regret this. When his father finds out you overstepped, you'll be out on the street." Evelyn moved closer. "Then let him fire me. But you're not touching this boy again." For a tense second, the two women faced each other, one fueled by anger, the other by instinct. Then Melissa snatched her purse, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed through the hallway. Silence. Evelyn turned to Michael. The boy's small frame shook as he pressed himself against the wall, his eyes red, his breathing uneven. Slowly, she knelt down, keeping her voice soft. "Hey, sweetheart." "It's okay. She's gone." He looked up, his lower lip trembling. "She said, if I tell, Mommy will leave forever." Evelyn's heart sank. The manipulation was cruel, too cruel for a child this young. She gently lifted his arm and pushed up the sleeve of his shirt. There were fresh red marks from Melissa's grip, but beneath those she saw something worse. Older bruises, some purple, others fading to yellow. It wasn't the first time. A deep, cold rage built inside her chest. She swallowed it down, forcing herself to stay calm. "Michael," she asked quietly, "has she done this before?" He nodded, wiping his tears with his sleeve. "She said if I told Daddy, he wouldn't love me anymore." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. She had promised herself years ago that if she ever saw something like this again, she would never stay silent. Not again. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. "Sweetheart, I need to take a few pictures, okay? I promise it won't hurt." The boy nodded hesitantly, clutching his toy truck with one hand, while she carefully photographed the bruises. Her fingers trembled, but her resolve didn't. Each picture was proof, a small act of defiance against the cruelty that had been hidden behind polished walls and expensive smiles. When she was done, she took a deep breath and dialed Daniel Grant's number, the father. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Come on, pick up, she whispered. Finally, she sent him a text. Mr. Grant, it's urgent. It's about Michael. Please come home immediately. A few moments later, the message showed seen. No reply. Her heart pounded. Then, almost without thinking, she attached the photos one by one and pressed send. It took only seconds. The phone rang. Daniel's voice came through, rough and panicked. What happened to my son? Mr. Grant, he's safe now. But your nanny, she was hurting him. I saw it myself. What? His voice broke. She left. I made her go. I'm coming home right now. And before Evelyn could say another word, he hung up. Daniel Grant, 34 years old, was one of Chicago's youngest and most successful real estate developers. At that exact moment, he had been in a high-rise boardroom negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal. But when he saw the photos on his phone, the world stopped. The contracts, the investors, the numbers, all of it disappeared into a blur. He bolted from the room, ignoring the confused looks of his team, and sprinted toward the elevator. His driver barely had time to open the door before Daniel shouted, "Home now!" As the car sped through the traffic lights, Daniel's mind replayed every time his son had woken up crying in the middle of the night. Every time he had looked smaller, quieter. Every time Daniel had told himself, it's just the divorce, he'll be fine. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He had been wrong, and tonight, someone would answer for it. 20 minutes later, the metallic gate of the Grant residence swung open, and Daniel's black BMW shot into the driveway. The car barely stopped before he was already out, slamming the door behind him. The winter air was biting, but Daniel didn't feel it. His pulse was pounding too loud, his hands trembling with fury and fear. He stormed into the house, calling out, "Evelyn! Michael!" Evelyn appeared at the top of the staircase, holding Michael close to her chest. The boy had finally stopped crying, but his face was still blotchy, his little hands clutching Evelyn's shirt as if it were the only safe thing in the world. "Where is she?" Daniel's voice cracked like thunder. "She's gone," Evelyn replied, her tone calm but firm. "I made her leave." Daniel ran up the stairs 2 at a time and stopped in front of them. His breath came heavy as he looked at his son, small, fragile, his eyes swollen from crying. "The sight hit him like a punch to the gut, buddy," he said softly, kneeling down. "It's okay now." "Daddy's here," but Michael hesitated. For a moment he didn't move. His big brown eyes flickered between his father and Evelyn. That hesitation broke Daniel's heart. Evelyn nodded gently, whispering, "It's all right, sweetheart. You can go to him." Only then did the boy let go of her and run into his father's arms. Daniel caught him, hugging him so tight that Michael whimpered again, though this time not from pain, from safety. Daniel's voice shook as he whispered into his son's hair, you're safe now, I promise. Nobody's ever going to hurt you again." When he finally looked up at Evelyn, his eyes were red. "Show me." Evelyn hesitated, then pulled out her phone and opened the gallery. The images glowed in the dim light. The small arm, the finger marks, the deep purples and reds, the older bruises fading to yellow. Daniel's jaw tightened with every swipe. By the last photo, his hand was trembling so much he had to put the phone down. "How long?" he asked, his voice breaking. Evelyn exhaled slowly. He said, "Since she started working here." "About 3 months." Daniel's stomach turned. 3 months. For 3 months, his son had lived in fear, crying alone at night, while he sat in his office downtown, thinking he was giving the boy a better life. He stood up suddenly, pacing the room. "I trusted her. God, I trusted her." Evelyn kept her voice low. "You couldn't have known." She hid it well, but I saw the way he flinched when she walked in. "I just didn't have proof until today." Daniel turned to her, his face hardening. "You did the right thing, Evelyn. You saved him." She shook her head. "I just did what anyone should have done." He gave a bitter smile. "No, most people look away." "You didn't." Downstairs, the sound of a door closing echoed faintly. The front gate, perhaps. Both of them tensed. Daniel grabbed the railing and looked down the staircase, expecting Melissa's face to appear again. But the hallway was empty. "She's not coming back," Evelyn reassured. "She left right after I stopped her." Daniel nodded, but his voice came low, dark, controlled. "Good. Because if she did, I don't know what I'd do. Michael tugged at his father's sleeve. Daddy? Daniel turned immediately, kneeling again. Yes, buddy. Is she going to come back? His small voice quivered. Daniel's heart shattered. No, son. She's gone for good. You don't have to see her ever again. The boy's eyes filled with tears of relief, and he pressed his face against Daniel's shoulder. Evelyn turned away, unable to hold back her own emotions. For the next hour, Daniel stayed with his son until the boy's breathing evened out and his eyelids grew heavy. He carried Michael to his room, tucked him in gently, and sat by the bed until he was sure he was asleep. When he finally came back downstairs, Evelyn was in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of untouched tea. The house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath after a storm. Daniel leaned against the counter. I keep thinking about all the times I told myself he was just being sensitive, that it was normal after the divorce. He shook his head, bitterness in his tone. How could I miss it? Evelyn met his gaze. Because you trusted her. And because you loved your son enough to believe he was just hurting inside, not outside. Daniel sat down across from her. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said quietly, Melissa was recommended by my ex-wife, Julia. She insisted on her, said she was family, someone responsible. I didn't argue. I thought it was the least I could do to make peace during the custody agreement. Evelyn frowned. Julia knew her. Cousin, Daniel muttered. A strict one, she said. But I didn't know strict meant cruel. He rubbed his temples. His exhaustion was visible now, the kind that came not from work but from guilt. I'll call my lawyer in the morning. I'm pressing charges? Evelyn looked alarmed. Mr. Grant, that might make things complicated with your ex-wife. Daniel met her eyes, steady and cold. I don't care. My son has bruises because I trusted the wrong people. That ends tonight. The silence that followed was thick. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the room. Finally, Evelyn said softly, If you need me to testify, I will. Daniel looked at her, his expression softening for the first time since he arrived. You do that? I saw what she did, Evelyn said. If keeping quiet means this could happen again, to him or another child, I can't stay silent. He nodded slowly, deeply moved. Thank you. For everything? As he stood, he paused for a moment, glancing up toward the staircase where Michael slept, then back at her. You know, he said quietly, when I left the office tonight, I thought the worst thing that could happen was losing a deal. Turns out I almost lost my son. Evelyn swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. But you didn't. He's safe now. Daniel gave a faint, grateful smile. Because of you. Outside, snow had begun to fall softly, blanketing the silent streets of Chicago. Inside, the house finally felt still, not peaceful yet, but no longer dangerous, and as Daniel stood there, staring at the woman who had protected his child when he couldn't, he realized something he hadn't felt in a long time: trust. For the first time since his marriage ended, he wasn't alone in trying to keep his world from falling apart. The morning after felt strangely quiet. The house, once filled with Michael's laughter and the steady rhythm of daily routine, now felt heavy with something unseen, guilt, tension, and a fragile kind of calm that could shatter with a single word. Evelyn woke early, as she always did, though her eyes were swollen from a restless night. She moved through the kitchen softly, careful not to make noise. The faint aroma of coffee filled the air. She hoped that making breakfast for Michael might bring a bit of normalcy back into his life, but she couldn't stop thinking about the bruises. Every time she blinked, she saw them, the marks that no child should ever have. Upstairs, Daniel hadn't slept much either. He sat at his desk, the lamp still on, papers scattered around, none of which he'd read. His mind was trapped in a loop, images of his son's bruised arms, Evelyn's trembling voice, Melissa's cold stare when he confronted her briefly outside the house before she fled into the night. He ran a hand over his face and took a deep breath. Then he picked up his phone and dialed his lawyer, David Lang. David, it's Daniel. Daniel, it's 7 a.m, came the groggy reply. I know. I need you to start a case today against Melissa Grant, child abuse. There was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then David's voice turned serious. What happened? Daniel explained everything. Evelyn's discovery, the photos, Michael's bruises. His voice cracked only once when he said, I didn't see it. I should have seen it, David sighed. You trusted her. You can't blame yourself for not expecting a monster in your own house. Bring the photos to my office. And Daniel, yes, if this goes public, your ex-wife will be dragged into it. She's the one who recommended the nanny, right? Daniel's voice hardened. Let her be. She needs to face what she did too. When he hung up, he sat still for a long time, staring at the phone, his reflection faint in the screen. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was ashamed. A knock came at the door. Mr. Grant! Evelyn's voice, quiet but steady. Come in. She stepped inside, holding a small tray with coffee and toast. Her uniform was neatly pressed, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. I thought you might need breakfast, she said softly. He looked up at her and managed a faint smile. Thank you, Evelyn, really, she hesitated. How's Michael? He's still asleep. I'm keeping him home from school for a few days. He needs time, Evelyn nodded. That's good. He shouldn't have to face people right now. Daniel took a sip of the coffee. It was strong, too strong, but he didn't mind. The warmth steadied him. He glanced at her again, noticing for the first time how her hands trembled slightly as she stood. You didn't sleep either, he said quietly. I kept thinking, what if I hadn't walked in at that moment? Daniel set the cup down. Then she might have gone further. And that thought keeps me awake too. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people connected by the same invisible wound, the guilt of seeing too late, the relief of acting just in time. Then Evelyn asked, will you tell your ex-wife? Daniel exhaled sharply. Julia will find out soon enough. She's the one who insisted Melissa work here. She said Michael needed structure, that he was getting too sensitive. I thought she just wanted to help him adjust. Sometimes, Evelyn said quietly, people think they're helping when they just want control. He looked at her, surprised by the calm wisdom in her tone. You sound like you've seen this before. Evelyn hesitated. My father used to hit my mother. For years she stayed. Said he was just teaching her to behave. Her voice trembled slightly. When you grow up around that, you learn to recognize the signs in other people. The way a child flinches, the way silence feels heavy in a room. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I didn't know. It's okay, she said. That's why I couldn't walk away yesterday. I promised myself a long time ago, if I ever saw something like that again, I'd stop it. Daniel's throat tightened. You didn't just stop it. You saved him. Before she could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. Daddy! They both turned. Michael stood there in his pajamas, hair messy, clutching his stuffed elephant. His eyes still carried traces of the night before. Daniel stood immediately and went to him. Hey, champ. You hungry? Michael nodded slowly. Evelyn smiled softly. I made pancakes. Want some? The boy hesitated, glancing between them as if afraid he might do something wrong. Come on, Daniel said, holding out his hand. Let's eat together. Downstairs. Evelyn served pancakes shaped like stars, the way she'd learned from her little nephew back in Ohio. Michael's eyes lit up just a little. He picked up his fork carefully and whispered, Thank you, Evelyn smiled. You're welcome, sweetheart. Daniel watched, quiet, his chest aching, as he realized how much the boy's smile had faded over the last few months, and how one kind gesture could bring a piece of it back. After breakfast, Michael went to the living room to draw, while Evelyn cleaned the kitchen. Daniel stood by the counter, phone in hand. I'm taking him to the doctor today, he said. We'll get an official report. Then I'll handle the rest with my lawyer. Evelyn nodded, drying her hands. Do you want me to come? He paused. Would you? If you think it'll help. He seems more comfortable when I'm around. Daniel gave a faint, grateful smile. Then yes, please. Hours later, they were at the pediatric clinic downtown. Michael sat quietly beside Evelyn, his small hand gripping hers as they waited. Daniel watched them from across the room, a young woman who had walked into his life as an employee and now felt like something far more important. When Dr. Collins called them in, He examined Michael gently, taking pictures, making notes. "These marks are consistent with deliberate force," he said firmly. "You'll need to report this. I can sign a statement for legal use," Daniel nodded. "Do whatever's necessary." Evelyn squeezed Michael's hand and smiled reassuringly. "You're being so brave." When they left the clinic, the afternoon sun had broken through the grey clouds, painting streaks of gold over the cold city streets. Daniel stood by the car door, looking at the two of them, his son and the woman, who had changed everything, and realized something quietly monumental. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting for a second chance at being the father and the man he should have been all along. That evening, the Grant residence no longer felt like the same house. The once sterile modern home, filled with silence and glass, had begun to breathe again. The dim yellow light from the living room lamp fell softly on the walls, casting warmth instead of emptiness. Evelyn sat cross-legged on the carpet beside Michael, who was drawing with colored pencils spread all over the floor. She watched him carefully, every small movement, every expression. He was quieter than other children his age, cautious with each line he drew, as if afraid that even a wrong stroke might bring someone's anger again. "What are you drawing?" she asked gently. He looked up, his eyes a soft brown that mirrored his father's. "It's you and Daddy," Evelyn blinked. On the paper were 3 stick figures, one tall man, one woman with long hair, and one small boy in the middle, holding both their hands. "That's beautiful," she said softly. Michael smiled a little, the first genuine smile she had seen since the incident. "Can I give it to Daddy?" "Of course." At that exact moment, Daniel appeared by the doorway. His tie was gone, the top buttons of his shirt undone, his face tired but softer than before. He watched the scene quietly, leaning against the frame. For a long moment he didn't speak. He simply watched his son being a child again, and realized how fragile that innocence was, how close he had come to losing it forever. Michael noticed him first. "Daddy, look what I made!" Daniel crouched beside him, smiling despite the ache in his chest. "Wow, that's amazing, buddy. You even gave me hair," Evelyn laughed quietly. "More than he actually has," she teased. Daniel looked at her, smiling faintly. For the first time in months, laughter felt natural. Later, after Michael was asleep, Daniel found Evelyn in the kitchen cleaning up. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between them. "I wanted to say thank you again," he began, his tone low but sincere. "You've already said that a dozen times," she replied without looking up. "I don't think I can say it enough." He paused, watching her hands move gracefully as she wiped the counter. "If you hadn't been here, I can't imagine." His voice faltered. Evelyn turned slightly, her expression calm but firm. "You don't have to imagine, Mr. Grant. He's safe now. That's what matters." Daniel nodded, though the guilt didn't leave his face. "I just keep thinking, how didn't I notice? I'm his father. I see him every day. Sometimes," Evelyn said gently, "love blinds us in a different way. We see what we hope is true, not what is true." Her words hung in the air for a moment. Daniel exhaled slowly. "You sound like someone who's had to learn that the hard way." Evelyn hesitated before answering. "When I was a teenager, my mom worked as a cleaner like me. Her boss used to yell at her, sometimes worse. I used to beg her to quit, but she always said, 'We need the money.' One night she came home with bruises and told me it was just from bumping into a cabinet. I knew it wasn't. I swore that day I'd never let anyone be hurt like that in front of me again." Daniel looked at her quietly, as if seeing her for the first time, not as the woman who worked in his home, but as someone who carried her own quiet strength. "You kept that promise," he said finally. She gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe, but promises like that, they don't fix what's already broken." They both stood in silence for a while. The clock ticked softly in the background. Finally, Daniel said, "My lawyer called this afternoon. The police will open an investigation. Melissa might try to deny everything, but the doctor's report is strong. And I'm filing for full custody of Michael." Evelyn froze for a second. "Full custody? It means Julia loses her right to decide anything about his care." His tone hardened. She brought that woman into my house. She'll have to answer for that. Evelyn looked down, her hands clasped. That's going to start a war. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then let it. She met his eyes, and for a brief second he saw the reflection of his own anger there, but hers wasn't born from rage. It was born from fear of what anger could do. Just promise me one thing, she said quietly. Don't let revenge become the reason you fight. Do it for Michael, not for payback. Daniel took a deep breath, then nodded. You're right. He leaned against the counter, his shoulders finally relaxing for the first time that day. You know, he trusts you more than anyone right now. He even asked if you'd still be here tomorrow. Evelyn smiled faintly. I'm not going anywhere. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, the quiet steadiness, the tired grace, the way her presence seemed to bring peace to every room she entered. I'm glad to hear that. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, like the calm that comes after a long, violent storm. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the kitchen window. Inside, something subtle but undeniable had begun to change. Daniel didn't know it yet. But the woman who had entered his life as his employee was about to become the anchor he never knew he needed, and the heart of a home that had forgotten what warmth felt like. 2 weeks passed, and the Grant mansion no longer felt haunted by fear, but by slow healing. The bruises on Michael's skin had begun to fade, replaced by soft freckles of childhood sunshine. Yet the wounds in his little heart still ran deep, surfacing at night when he woke from dreams that made him cry out softly, "Don't hurt me." Each time, Evelyn was there. Sometimes she sat by his bed for hours, humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing when storms rattled the windows. It was a simple tune, but it had a way of softening the air around them. One night, after Michael finally fell asleep, Daniel stood silently in the hallway, unseen, listening to her voice drift through the half-open door. It was steady, tender, and it made something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. When Evelyn stepped out, she jumped a little seeing him there. "Oh, Mr. Grant, I didn't realize." He raised a hand. "Please, it's Daniel. You've earned the right to drop the mister by now." She smiled faintly, but said nothing. He looked past her at his son sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. "He doesn't scream in his sleep when you're around." Evelyn's voice softened. "He just needs to know someone's there. Kids don't forget being scared overnight." Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on the sleeping child. "I can't stop thinking about how I failed him, how I let this happen." "You didn't fail him," she said quietly. "You trusted the wrong person. That doesn't make you a bad father. It makes you human." He looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, someone's words reached the part of him he'd kept buried behind success, deadlines, and guilt. "You always know what to say," he murmured. "Not really," she said with a small laugh. "I just say what I wish someone had told me when I was little." There was a long pause, one of those silences that didn't need to be filled. Then before she could leave, Daniel spoke again. "Would you come to the court hearing next week? I want you to testify. But also, I think he'll feel safer if you're there." Evelyn hesitated. "Of course. I'll be there." The morning of the custody hearing arrived grey and cold. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, the sky heavy with clouds. Daniel held Michael's small hand as they climbed the stairs, Evelyn following quietly behind them. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and everything smelled faintly of coffee and nervous sweat. Daniel's lawyer, David Lang, was already waiting, papers tucked neatly under one arm. "Julia's here," he said. She brought her attorney. "Be ready." Daniel nodded, jaw clenched. Through the glass partition, he saw her, Julia Grant, his ex-wife, immaculate as always, her honey-blonde hair perfectly straightened, her lips pressed into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was the picture of composure, but Daniel knew that look. He'd seen it when she wanted something, control. Evelyn kept her eyes down, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. When the courtroom doors opened, they all stepped inside. The room was larger than she'd expected. Dark wood walls, rows of benches, and the judge sitting high above, his face unreadable behind round glasses. Daniel sat at one table with his lawyer, Julia at the other. Evelyn sat behind them, her palms damp, heart racing. The hearing began. "Mr. Grant, you are seeking full custody of your son, Michael Grant, based on claims of negligence and physical abuse by the nanny hired under Mrs. Grant's recommendation. Is that correct?" Daniel stood. "Yes, Your Honor, and you have evidence. My employee, Ms. Cooper, witnessed the abuse and took photographic proof. There's also a medical report confirming intentional injuries." Julia's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is all being exaggerated. Children fall, they bruise." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Counselor. We'll review the evidence first." David handed the photographs and doctor's report to the bailiff. The judge studied them carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. "These are not the kind of bruises a child gets from play," he said sternly. "They're patterned, repeated." "Miss Cooper, please step forward." Evelyn froze. Her legs felt heavy as she walked to the witness stand. Her hands trembled as she took the oath. "Miss Cooper," the judge began, "tell the court what you witnessed." She swallowed hard, but her voice held steady. "I was cleaning the hallway when I heard a child screaming. When I entered Michael's room, the nanny, Melissa Grant, was gripping his arm hard, and then she pinched him, leaving a red mark. I stopped her and made her leave. Did this appear to be an isolated incident?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, Your Honor. When I rolled up his sleeve, there were older bruises, yellow ones. That's when I realized this had been happening for a while." Julia's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this woman is just a maid. How do we know she's not exaggerating to keep her job?" Evelyn turned to him, her eyes steady. "I didn't do this for a job. I did it because that child was being hurt. And if doing the right thing cost me work, then so be it." A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's eyes softened slightly. Daniel looked at her with pride, not as an employer, but as someone who owed her everything. After a few more questions, the judge dismissed her from the stand. As she walked back to her seat, Julia shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass, but Evelyn didn't flinch. Then it was Daniel's turn. He spoke about his son, his regret, his discovery of the truth. His voice cracked only once when he said, "A child trusted me to protect him, and I failed. I will not fail him again." By the end of the hearing, the courtroom was silent except for the scribbling of the judge's pen. Finally, he looked up. "I've seen enough. The evidence is clear. Custody of Michael Grant will be awarded solely to his father. Mrs. Grant will have supervised visitation twice a month. As for Melissa Grant, this court recommends immediate criminal investigation for child abuse." Julia's face drained of color. "You can't do this!" "He turned my son against me." "Order!" The judge snapped. Daniel closed his eyes, a wave of relief and heartbreak washing over him all at once. Evelyn let out a slow breath she didn't know she'd been holding. When they stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, like something had finally been washed away. Michael ran ahead, jumping over puddles. Daniel watched him, smiling through tears he didn't bother to hide. Evelyn stood beside him, quiet, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "You saved us both," he said softly. Evelyn looked up at him, startled. "What?" "I might have gotten my son back," Daniel said, "but without you, I wouldn't have gotten myself back." For the first time since they met, she couldn't find words. She just smiled, and the faintest warmth rose in her chest. Something new, something fragile, something that might one day be called love. But for now, it was enough to stand there, side by side, beneath the clearing sky, watching a little boy rediscover the freedom to laugh. The morning light crept gently through the curtains of the Grant mansion, the kind of golden light that promised a new beginning. For the first time in months, the air inside felt warm and alive again. There was laughter in the kitchen, small, hesitant at first, then full and free. Michael sat on a stool by the counter, swinging his legs while drawing with colored pencils. He had drawn a family again. Himself, his dad, and Evelyn, this time in bright colors. Daniel watched from across the table, coffee cup in hand, smiling quietly. Evelyn stood by the stove, flipping pancakes, the scent of butter and maple syrup filling the room. It was an ordinary scene, yet to them it felt extraordinary. When she turned, Daniel caught her eye. For a brief moment neither spoke, but something passed between them, an understanding born not from words, but from everything they'd endured together. "Michael," Daniel said softly, "those pancakes smell so good. I think I might eat all of them myself." The boy laughed, shaking his head. "No way, Daddy, they're mine." Evelyn chuckled. "Don't worry, there's plenty for everyone." Daniel leaned back, watching her. It amazed him how seamlessly she had brought light back into this house. The woman who once came here as an employee had become the heartbeat of his home. That afternoon, Daniel received a call from his lawyer, David Lang. "It's official," David said. "The court filed the paperwork. You have full custody of Michael. Julia's visitation will remain supervised." Daniel exhaled slowly. Relief, gratitude, and exhaustion washed through him all at once. "Thank you, David, for everything." "Don't thank me," the lawyer said. "Thank the woman who stood up for your son. People like her don't come around often." Daniel looked through the kitchen window, where Evelyn was outside with Michael, helping him plant small flowers in the garden. The boy laughed every time he accidentally spilled dirt on her apron. "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "I already do." When he hung up, he stepped outside. The sky was pale blue, the air crisp, the grass damp underfoot. Evelyn looked up as he approached. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," he smiled. "It's over, officially. The court gave me full custody." Her eyes widened with relief. "That's wonderful, Daniel," he nodded. "And they're opening a criminal case against Melissa. She won't hurt another child again." Evelyn's shoulders relaxed, the tension that had lived in her body for weeks finally melting away. "Thank God." Michael looked up from the soil. "Daddy, does that mean we can stay together now?" "Always?" Daniel knelt beside him, smiling. "Yes, buddy, always." Michael beamed and hugged both of them, his little arms barely reaching around their waists. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, and when she looked at Daniel, she saw the same emotion mirrored there. Days turned into weeks, and the wounds, physical and emotional, began to heal. Evelyn no longer felt like a guest in the house. She was part of it. She started helping Michael with his homework, cooking dinners, telling bedtime stories. And every evening, Daniel found himself drawn to the sound of her laughter, echoing through the hallways. Soft, steady, full of life. But one night, after Michael went to bed, Daniel found her sitting by the fireplace, lost in thought. He walked over quietly. "You're still awake?" She smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep. Guess I'm just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange life is," she said softly. "I came here because I needed work. I never thought I'd end up finding a family." Daniel sat beside her, the glow of the fire flickering across his face. "You didn't just find one, Evelyn. You built one." She looked at him, her eyes shimmering in the warm light. "You really think so?" "I know so." The silence that followed was gentle, comfortable, the kind of quiet that comes when two hearts finally understand each other. Daniel reached out slowly, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "you've changed everything for us. For me, I don't want you to feel like you work for me anymore." Her breath caught. "Daniel!" He hesitated, searching her eyes. "What if you stayed, not as an employee, but as part of this family? Officially." For a long moment she just stared at him, stunned. "What are you saying?" He smiled softly, his voice steady now. "I'm saying that I can't imagine this house without you. That I don't want to." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't mean that just because of gratitude, do you?" He shook his head. "No, I mean it because somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air, like something sacred. Evelyn blinked, tears spilling freely now. "I was afraid you'd say that," she whispered, smiling through the tears. "Because I think I've felt the same for a while." Daniel reached up, brushing away a tear from her cheek. "Then don't be afraid anymore." The world seemed to pause around them, the fire crackling softly, the rain starting to tap against the window outside, the air thick with everything unspoken between them. When he leaned in, she didn't pull away. Their lips met softly at first, then deeper. as if years of pain and hope had found their answer in a single heartbeat. And somewhere upstairs, in the quiet of his room, Michael stirred in his sleep, but for the first time in months, he didn't dream of fear. He dreamt of laughter, of sunlight, of home, because that's what the Grant house had become again, a home built not from wealth or walls, but from the courage of a woman who chose to protect a child, and the love that grew from that act of bravery. Outside, dawn began to break again, a soft, new light spilling across the sky. The kind of light that only comes after a long, dark night has finally ended.